4 days. Just 4 days is all it took for my entire family, my parents, my aunt, my uncle, and my 2 cousins, to go from sunning themselves on a cruise ship they'd purchased with my money, to standing on my doorstep, soaked, shivering, and literally begging me to let them back into their lives. They thought I was the safety net, the fool they could steal from and then run back to when their little fantasy fell apart. But what they didn't realize was that I didn't just fix the situation, I surgically dismantled the entitled life they had built, and left them with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. Tell me honestly, after hearing the whole story, was I wrong for making them beg? Would you have done the same thing if your own family stole your entire financial future for a week-long vacation? I need to start this story back in the spring, months before the disastrous Christmas I just mentioned. I'm a planner, always have been. I'm 26, working a decent job, but I've been obsessed with buying a house since I was 18. I'd been meticulously saving for years, but I needed a jump start. That's where the $8,500 came in. It wasn't savings, it was a personal loan I'd managed to secure from my credit union with the sole purpose of using it as a beefy down payment on a fixer-upper. I had already identified the property, run the numbers, and was just waiting for the loan to clear. To my family, I was always the reliable one, the successful, stable one who had somehow escaped the cycle of financial instability that plagues our extended family. They saw my success not as a result of hard work, but as a resource for them to exploit. My parents, bless their hearts, are incredibly trusting, almost to a fault, and they often bend to the demands of my sister and her family, which includes my aunt and uncle. This whole dynamic created the perfect storm for what was about to happen. The problem started with Grandma. My 80-year-old grandmother, whom I absolutely adore, has lived with my parents for the past decade. She requires consistent care, and while she's generally healthy, she needs help with meals, errands, and mobility. My parents were taking on the brunt of this, but it was getting exhausting for them. My sister Clara and her husband Paul, along with their 2 kids, constantly complained about how hard it was for them to help out even though they lived less than 15 minutes away and would visit maybe once a month. Then, one day in early December, my Aunt Carol floated the idea of a family cruise to the Caribbean, a Christmas cruise. It sounded lovely, except for 2 major issues: it was outrageously expensive, and no one was willing to pay for it. The idea quickly snowballed into a must-do family event, driven primarily by Clara and Aunt Carol. My parents, stressed out by the holiday season and Grandma's care, initially resisted, citing the cost. That's when Clara, with her talent for emotional manipulation, started selling the idea that they deserved this break, that they had earned a week of luxury after all the sacrifice. But who would pay? I was away on a short, intense business trip right as the Christmas season peaked. Before I left, I had transferred the $8,500 loan money into my parents' checking account, which they share with me for emergencies, and for paying the utility bills on the house I co-own with them. It was a temporary measure. My own account was being flagged by my credit union for a large incoming transfer, and they asked me to route it through an established, stable account for 48 hours to avoid any issues with the upcoming property transfer. I completely trusted my parents. I told them specifically, "This is the down payment money. Do not touch it, not even a penny. It's earmarked for the house." My father, a man of simple honor, swore on it. My mother simply nodded, already overwhelmed with holiday baking. I left on the Tuesday, confident that my financial future was secure. The house deal was set to close the following Monday. The business trip went smoothly, and I arrived back home late on Christmas Eve. It was snowing lightly, the kind of perfect silent snow that promises a magical Christmas morning. I drove up to my parents' house and immediately something felt off. The usual warm glow of holiday lights was absent. The driveway was empty. My sisters', aunts', and uncles' cars were also gone, which was highly unusual for Christmas Eve. I unlocked the front door, expecting the usual chaos of wrapping paper, noise, and the smell of pine and gingerbread. But the house was utterly silent, and eerily dark. The living room, where the tree should have been a focal point of twinkling lights, was dark. I walked into the kitchen, and there, sitting alone at the large oak table, was Grandma. She was in her bathrobe, slowly eating a bowl of what looked like Thanksgiving leftovers, a mix of cold stuffing and gravy, with a distant look in her eyes. The atmosphere was thick with a silence that screamed abandonment. My heart sank into my stomach. "Grandma, what are you doing? Where is everyone?" I asked, rushing over to her. She looked up at me startled, then smiled weakly. "Oh dear, you're back. They've gone, honey. They left this morning." She gestured faintly towards the counter. There, propped against the salt shaker, was a single folded piece of notepaper. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I recognized my mother's hurried, familiar handwriting. The note contained the 7 most devastating lines I had ever read. "We are so sorry. We took the money. We spent your $8,500 loan on a family cruise. We couldn't say no to the kids. We needed a break. Take care of her. We will call you when we get back. Merry Christmas." My vision tunneled. 8,500, my house, my future, gone. Stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect me. They didn't just spend the money, they wiped out the account, left a frail, elderly woman alone on Christmas, and then had the audacity to write, "Take care of her." They had essentially mortgaged my future for their week of selfish pleasure, and their final act was to dump their responsibility for Grandma onto my shoulders like a sack of garbage. I reread the note 3 times, each word a fresh stab of betrayal. I looked over at Grandma, who was now just staring into her bowl of cold food. She looked desolate. I managed to choke out, "Grandma, why didn't you stop them? You were here." She put down her spoon and sighed, the sound of pure exhaustion. "Oh honey, they told me they had permission from you. They said you generously offered to pay for their trip as a Christmas gift for the whole family and that you'd be back to watch me right away. They promised me they had it all worked out." Her voice broke a little. "I told them it didn't sound like you, but they swore on it. Your mother said you wanted it to be a surprise." I felt a wave of crushing anger and profound sorrow. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had lied to and manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman to cover their tracks. I sat down next to her, and for a moment I didn't say anything. I just stared at the note. Then, Grandma reached out and placed her wrinkled hand over mine. "I'm sorry, dear, we'll fix this, I promise you." The simple conviction in her voice, even as she was the victim, was the only thing that stopped me from screaming into the silent house. "We'll fix this," she said again, squeezing my hand. I looked at her, nodded, a silent agreement passing between us. I didn't know how we would fix it, but in that moment, Grandma's quiet resilience became my resolve. They had given me a responsibility, but they had also given me a silent partner in the person I cared about most. My rage began to cool and solidify into a cold, focused determination. They wanted to play a game of consequences? Fine. I would set the rules. The next morning, Christmas Day, was spent making Grandma feel special, not abandoned. I cooked a proper meal, we watched old movies, and I didn't mention the cruise ship or the money again. But in the back of my mind, the clock was ticking. I knew they were unreachable until they reached port, which would be several days away, leaving me with a window of opportunity. My first move was to protect Grandma. I called a close, trusted family friend, Martha, a retired nurse who lives nearby. I explained the situation to her in vague but urgent terms, simply saying my parents had been called away for a family emergency, and I needed to handle a financial disaster. And could she possibly stay with Grandma for a few days to make sure she was okay? Martha, being a saint, agreed instantly. I settled her in, paid her generously in advance, and reassured Grandma that she was in good hands. Then, I focused on the house. The house was technically my parents' property, but I had put a significant amount of my own money into renovations over the years, and as an investment, my name was on the deed as a joint owner with right of survivorship. This gave me significant legal standing. They had stolen my down payment money, which meant I had to put the property purchase on hold. But they had also vacated their home and abandoned a dependent in my care, leaving me with a signed written confession of their theft. The house was my leverage, and I intended to use it to maximum effect. I spent all of December 26th at a lawyer's office, showing him the deed, the transaction record showing the withdrawal of the $8,500, and the signed note. The lawyer was shocked but precise. Given the abandonment of a dependent Grandma, and the explicit confession of theft of a large sum of money, coupled with my partial ownership of the property, I had every right to secure the house. We worked quickly. That afternoon, a legal notice was drafted and delivered, securing my position as the sole caretaker of the property in the immediate future, citing their abandonment. But I went one step further. I didn't just want to stop them from entering the house, I wanted them to feel the full weight of the loss they had caused. The next morning, I took my key, let myself in, and proceeded to change all the locks, front door, back door, and garage. I didn't want them to think they could just waltz back in. I then had a long emotional conversation with Grandma, where I explained that I was doing this to protect her and to get my money back. She understood, though she looked sad. I knew I couldn't simply let her stay in the house alone even with Martha there, because the longer-term legal battle could get messy. I wanted her safe and comfortable. So, I used the remaining 1,000% I had in my personal savings to rent a cozy 2-bedroom apartment near the lawyer's office. It was temporary, but it was safe. Martha agreed to continue her caregiving there. On December 27th, I moved Grandma and Martha into the new apartment, taking only their essentials. I left the house standing, completely empty, a shell of what it had been. I wanted the house to be waiting, but empty, when they returned. The lawyer advised me to sell off some of the unnecessary, non-sentimental items in the house to begin recouping the $8,500, but I decided against it. I wanted the repayment to come from the people who took it. I wanted them to pay, not the house. So that's the situation I was in. My parents, sister, aunt, and uncle were out on the ocean, sipping margaritas and enjoying the life I was supposed to be building, while I was left holding the pieces and caring for the one person they abandoned. I was devastated, furious, and frankly terrified about my own financial future. I had the legal right, the motive, and the opportunity to make them pay for every ounce of pain and betrayal they had inflicted. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did to make them regret that cruise, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have sold the house immediately, or would you have waited for them to return and face the music? Let me know your gut reaction. I waited. For 4 days I went about my life, visiting Grandma and Martha at the new apartment, filing, paperwork, and just trying to breathe. I had already put the new house purchase on hold, and was trying to negotiate a deferment on the first loan payment, explaining the bizarre theft to a very skeptical loan officer. But I knew the real confrontation would happen when they got off that ship. I didn't have to wait long. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve, around 6:00 p.m. I was at my own small apartment, waiting for the phone to ring. It wasn't the phone, it was a hysterical banging on my door. I opened the door and found the whole miserable crew standing on my porch, suitcases at their feet, faces pale and drawn. The cruise had clearly been less than relaxing. My sister Clara was crying. My mother looked like she hadn't slept in days. My father, the picture of defeat, just stared at the ground. Aunt Carol and Uncle Paul looked furious but also utterly lost. "We're home," my mother choked out as if that explained everything. "Where is Grandma? Where is everyone? Why isn't anyone answering at the house?" I leaned against the door frame, a picture of calm that masked a volcano of internal rage. "Welcome home. I trust you had a lovely cruise on my down payment money." The color drained completely from my mother's face. "The house, Mom. You went to the house, didn't you? Where are the keys you had?" My father sheepishly pulled a large keyring out of his pocket. We tried to get in, but the locks are different and there was a notice from a lawyer taped to the door." "What is going on?" I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. "What is going on," I said slowly, emphasizing every word, "is that you stole $8,500 from me, abandoned your elderly dependent mother on Christmas Eve with a note saying take care of her, and left me to clean up your disgusting selfish mess. So, I took care of it. I changed the locks on your house, and I have obtained a temporary restraining order against all of you from entering the property." The collective gasp was audible. Clara shrieked, "You changed the locks? On our house? That's illegal." "No, Clara," I corrected her coldly. "What you did was illegal. I am a part owner of that property. And since you collectively demonstrated an inability to manage it, or the responsibility that comes with it, I secured it. I am in full legal control of the property until the $8,500 you stole is back in my account, plus a hefty fee for emotional damages and the cost of the legal fees I had to incur to protect myself." My father finally looked up, his eyes full of hurt and disbelief. "Son, we were going to pay you back. We swear we'll take out a loan. You had a perfectly good loan, Dad, mine, and you spent it on cocktails and buffet dinners. As for paying me back, you should have thought of that before you left me a note and abandoned Grandma." "Where is Grandma?" my mother whispered, her voice cracking with sudden panic. "Is she okay? Did you put her in a home?" "She's fine," I said, a little softening in my voice but quickly hardening it again. "She's safe, warm, and well cared for in a rental apartment I paid for with the last of my savings. With Martha, the nurse you all conveniently forgot existed, she is not coming back here until I have every cent of my money, and until I am guaranteed that she will never be abandoned like that again." Aunt Carol and Uncle Paul stepped forward, their entitled rage boiling over. "You little jerk, you can't do this. That's our home, we have things in there." "You're right," I replied, meeting Aunt Carol's glare. "It was your home, now it's evidence. You can call my lawyer. His number is on the notice you tore off the door." He's the only one who can grant you access to retrieve your possessions, and only then under my direct supervision. And the cost of his time will be deducted from the eventual payout you all owe me." I watched them, defeated and miserable, standing on my porch with nowhere to go. My sister sobbed, "We have nowhere to sleep. It's New Year's Eve." "That," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "is the consequence of theft and abandonment. You made your choice. You chose a week of pleasure over your responsibility and my future. Now you live with it. I will see you all in court." And then, I shut the door. I didn't slam it, I just closed it quietly and locked the deadbolt. I stood there leaning against the wood, listening to the muffled, hysterical arguments erupting outside. They stood out there in the cold for over an hour. They tried calling me, texting me, and eventually resorting to begging through the door, promising anything and everything. "Please just let us in for one night. We're so cold. We'll sign whatever you want." That's when the begging truly started. They were broken finally, realizing that their actions had consequences beyond a simple slap on the wrist. They had underestimated me, viewing me only as a bank account, and I had withdrawn my services entirely. They ended up spending the first night of the new year in a cheap, flea-ridden motel an hour away, having maxed out their credit cards on the cruise. The aftermath was swift and brutal. My lawyer filed a civil suit for the $8,500, plus damages and legal fees. He also threatened to involve Adult Protective Services due to the abandonment of Grandma. That threat was the final nail in the coffin. My parents, terrified of facing criminal charges or losing their rights to Grandma entirely, crumbled. My father, in a tearful call to me the next day, finally admitted the full extent of the coercion from my sister and aunt, but also took full responsibility for his own lack of backbone. The begging intensified. The resolution was complicated, but effective. My sister and her husband, completely broke and facing massive debt, had to sell their car and drain their retirement savings just to cover their portion of the debt I demanded. Aunt Carol and Uncle Paul had to liquidate stocks to cover theirs. My parents, who had the most to lose, had to take out a high-interest personal loan not to pay me, but to pay my lawyer's escrow account. Within 3 weeks, the full $8,500, plus an additional $2,000 for legal and temporary housing costs, was back in my hands. The moment the funds cleared, the restraining order was lifted, and I returned the keys to the house. I moved Grandma back in, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. I retained co-ownership of the house, but a legally binding document was drawn up stating that Grandma's care was not the sole responsibility of my parents, and that any major family financial decision required my express written consent. My parents now treat me with a respect bordering on fear, and they have completely cut off financial interaction with my sister and aunt. The money was back, the house was secured, and the lesson had been taught. My sister and aunt no longer speak to me, they call me cruel and vengeful, but I simply call it consequences. I'm now back on track to buy the fixer-upper, and I check in on Grandma every single day. The moral of the story is this: never let the people you love mistake your kindness for weakness. When someone steals your future, you don't just ask for it back, you take control of the entire field. Like this video, if you were on my side and agree that they deserved every miserable moment of that 4-day fallout. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the meek inherit the consequences. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I want to know if I took it too far, or if I was simply protecting myself. I'll see you all in the next story.